Let me fill you in on something that's been happening behind closed doors in Moscow that the mainstream media isn't telling you about. According to multiple diplomatic sources who spoke with Politico on January 18th, Vladimir Putin is reportedly seething after Xi Jinping made an unprecedented demand that the Russian president appear at the Kremlin for what insiders are calling a subordination ceremony. This isn't just another diplomatic meeting between two allied strongmen. This is about power, humiliation, and the complete reshaping of global influence that's been building for 3 years. We're talking about a relationship that started as a partnership of equals and has quietly transformed into something that looks disturbingly like a master-servant dynamic. And Putin just realized he's not the one holding the leash. Here's the scoop. Vladimir Putin built his entire political identity on one unshakable principle: Russia bows to no one. For 25 years, he's positioned himself as the ultimate alpha leader, the man who stared down NATO, rebuilt Russian power, and made Western leaders nervous at international summits. His popularity in Russia has always rested on this image of strength and independence. According to a December 2024 Levada Center poll, 71% of Russians view Putin favorably, specifically because they believe he restored their country's status as a global superpower. That perception is about to get tested in ways that could shatter Putin's carefully constructed image, because Xi Jinping isn't asking Putin to meet him in Beijing for tea and diplomatic platitudes. He's demanding Putin show up at his own capital like a regional governor reporting to the emperor. And there's a reason why this matters more than any summit they've held before. The trigger event happened during the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Tianjin on September 1, 2025. Multiple witnesses told CNN that Xi Jinping pulled Putin aside during what was supposed to be a photo opportunity. According to sources with knowledge of the conversation, Xi's language was direct and unmistakable. He told Putin that their next meeting would take place in Moscow, that it would be organized according to Beijing's specifications, and that Putin would publicly acknowledge China's leadership in their strategic partnership. Foreign policy analyst Dr. Michael Chen, who served as a State Department advisor on Asian affairs for 12 years, explained to MSNBC on January 20th that this type of demand is unprecedented in modern great power relations. What Xi is doing here is forcing Putin to accept a hierarchical relationship in public view, Chen stated. This isn't diplomacy, this is subjugation with cameras rolling. The language Xi used matters here. Let's be real for a second. In diplomatic circles, words are chosen with surgical precision. When Xi reportedly told Putin that Moscow needed to demonstrate proper alignment with Beijing's global vision, he wasn't making a suggestion, he was issuing an ultimatum. 3 separate intelligence analysts confirmed to Fox News on January 21st that Chinese diplomatic cables explicitly framed the Moscow meeting as an opportunity for Putin to acknowledge realities about Russia's position in the partnership. Translation: bend the knee or face economic consequences that could cripple what's left of Russia's war-torn economy. Now here's where it gets interesting. This isn't the first time Xi has pushed Putin into uncomfortable positions. Let me take you back through a pattern that's been building since Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022. Each instance reveals how systematically China has been tightening its grip on Russian decision-making, while Putin pretended he still had options. First example, the energy deals. When Western sanctions cut Russia off from European energy markets, Putin desperately needed Chinese buyers for Russian oil and natural gas. In May 2023, Russia agreed to sell oil to China at a 30% discount below market prices, according to Bloomberg's analysis published on May 28th. But here's the kicker. China also demanded and received payment terms that allow Beijing to delay payments for up to 90 days while Russia delivers energy immediately. Dr. Sarah Martinez, an energy economist at Georgetown University who studied Sino-Russian trade for 15 years, told CBS News on June 14, 2023, that these terms are extraordinarily favorable to China and represent the kind of arrangement you'd see between a dominant economy and a dependent supplier, not between strategic partners. Russia became China's gas station, and Putin had to smile and call it cooperation. Second example, the military technology transfer. According to Defense Intelligence Agency documents reviewed by Politico in August 2024, China has been systematically demanding access to Russia's most advanced military technologies as a condition for continued economic support. We're talking about hypersonic missile designs, submarine quieting technologies, and nuclear weapons delivery systems that Russia spent decades developing. The price tag for Chinese economic lifelines? Putin has been handing over military secrets that the Soviet Union would have guarded with the lives of thousands of agents. A former Pentagon analyst who spoke on condition of anonymity told Fox News on August 23, 2024, that Russia is being strip-mined for technology while China positions itself as the benefactor. Putin knows he's being exploited, but he has no leverage to stop it. Third example, the Belt and Road stranglehold. When Russia needed infrastructure investment after sanctions decimated its ability to borrow from Western markets, China stepped in with what looked like generous Belt and Road Initiative funding. According to the Financial Times analysis from November 2024, China has invested over $60 billion in Russian infrastructure projects since 2022. But the terms of these investments give Chinese companies operational control over ports, railways, and energy pipelines for 30 to 50 years. Dr. James Liu, a professor of international relations at Yale, who focuses on Chinese foreign policy strategy, explained to MSNBC on November 17, 2024, that China is doing to Russia what it did to smaller countries in Central Asia and Africa, using debt and infrastructure investment to gain permanent strategic leverage. The difference is that Russia is supposed to be a great power. This shouldn't be happening to a country of Russia's stature. Fourth example, the currency humiliation. In 2024, Russia pushed hard for BRICS countries to create an alternative to the US dollar for international trade. Putin envisioned a system where the Russian ruble and Chinese yuan would share equal status. According to Reuters reporting from October 15, 2024, China essentially vetoed any arrangement that didn't position the yuan as the dominant BRICS currency. The result? Russian companies now conduct over 85% of their international trade in yuan, while Chinese companies rarely accept rubles for payment. Moscow economics professor Dr. Viktor Petrov, interviewed by CBS on October 28, 2024, called this arrangement monetary colonization and noted that Russia has effectively surrendered its monetary sovereignty to Beijing while pretending this was a mutual decision. See the pattern here? Each time Putin faced pressure, he made concessions to China. Each concession reduced Russia's independence. Each reduction in independence made the next demand easier for Xi to enforce. It's a ratchet effect, and it only moves in one direction. Now let's talk about the impossible position Putin finds himself in. This is the catch-22 that's keeping Russian officials up at night, and it's honestly hard to believe we're watching a nuclear superpower get painted into this corner. If Putin accepts Xi's demand and appears at the Kremlin under Beijing's conditions, he validates everything his critics have been saying. Russia has become a Chinese vassal state. His domestic support, built on projecting strength, could collapse. The January 2025 Russian Public Opinion Research Center poll showed that 68% of Russians still believe their country is independent from foreign influence. When Putin shows up to his own capital to receive what amounts to instructions from Beijing, that perception dies. Opposition figures like Alexei Navalny's team have already prepared messaging, according to sources who spoke with CNN on January 19th, calling the planned meeting Putin's surrender ceremony. But if Putin refuses Xi's demand, the economic consequences could be catastrophic. China controls Russia's energy export markets, provides the currency for international trade, and serves as the primary source for the microchips and advanced components that Russia needs to sustain its war effort in Ukraine. Dr. Angela Morrison, a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations who specializes in Russian economic policy, told Politico on January 21st that, without Chinese economic support, Russia's economy would contract by an estimated 15 to 20% within 6 months. We're talking about a potential economic collapse that would make the 1998 ruble crisis look manageable by comparison. Putin can't afford to say no, but he can't afford to say yes either. This is where the fracturing becomes visible. Inside the Kremlin, factions are forming around how to handle what everyone now privately calls the China problem. According to multiple reports from sources with knowledge of internal Russian government dynamics, Putin's inner circle has split into 3 camps. The pragmatists, led reportedly by Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin, argue that Russia should accept its diminished status and maximize economic benefits from Chinese partnership. The nationalists, represented by figures close to Defense Minister Andrei Belousov, push for finding alternative partners or accepting economic pain to preserve independence. And Putin sits in the middle, trying to delay a decision he knows he'll eventually have to make. The Biden administration has been watching this dynamic with what sources describe as fascinated horror. A State Department official, who spoke with Fox News on January 22nd on condition of anonymity, noted that, "We've been warning for years that Russia's pivot to China would end badly for Moscow, But even we didn't anticipate how quickly Xi would move to formalize a hierarchical relationship. European intelligence services have reportedly shared assessments with NATO allies suggesting that Putin is actively seeking ways to diversify Russia's international partnerships to reduce dependence on China, but finding almost no willing partners with the economic capacity to replace Chinese support. Now here's the kicker. Legal and diplomatic experts are raising questions about whether this arrangement even fits within established frameworks of international law. While there's no formal legal mechanism to prevent one country from demanding another leader's presence at a meeting, the implications of such demands between sovereign nations touch on fundamental principles of state equality enshrined in the UN Charter. Professor Diana Williams, who teaches international law at Harvard Law School and previously served as a legal advisor to the State Department for 8 years, gave an analysis to CBS News on January 23rd that should make everyone pay attention. The UN Charter's Article 2 establishes the sovereign equality of all member states, Williams explained. When one permanent Security Council member begins treating another as a subordinate power, we're seeing the erosion of principles that have governed international relations since 1945. This isn't just about Russia and China. This is about whether great power relationships will continue to operate under norms of mutual respect or revert to imperial-style hierarchies. The language Williams uses matters: constitutionally indefensible erosion of sovereign equality principles. We're not talking about a temporary imbalance or a negotiating tactic. We're watching the potential restructuring of how major powers interact on the global stage. And here's what makes this situation even more remarkable. Conservative foreign policy experts, who traditionally align with realpolitik approaches, are expressing concern about the precedent being set. Dr. Robert Chambers, a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute who advised 3 Republican administrations on Russia policy, told Fox News on January 24th that, while many of us have no sympathy for Putin's predicament given his aggression in Ukraine, we should be deeply concerned about a world where China feels empowered to openly subordinate other great powers. Today, it's Russia. Tomorrow, it could be any country that becomes economically dependent on Beijing. Let's break down the 3 major implications of what's happening, because this isn't just about 2 countries having a difficult conversation. First implication: political fallout for Putin's domestic legitimacy. Russian political stability has rested for 2 decades on the narrative that Putin restored Russia to great power status after the humiliation of the Soviet collapse. According to Dr. Nina Volkov, a Russia specialist at Columbia University interviewed by MSNBC on January 25th, Putin's entire political contract with the Russian people is based on the promise of restored dignity and international respect. If Russian citizens watch their president take orders from Beijing on global television, that contract is broken. The regime has already begun restricting media coverage of Russia-China relations, according to multiple reports from independent Russian journalists. State-controlled media outlets received directives in late January to minimize discussion of the planned Moscow meeting and avoid any language suggesting hierarchy in the bilateral relationship. That's not the behavior of a government confident in its narrative. Second implication: institutional damage to international norms of sovereign equality. For 80 years, the international system has operated on the fiction that all sovereign states are legal equals, even when power disparities are obvious. China's public subordination of Russia threatens to replace that fiction with open acknowledgement of imperial-style relationships. Dr. Michael Torres, who studies international institutions at Princeton and previously worked for the UN Secretariat, told Politico on January 26th that, once you establish that great powers can openly treat each other as unequal, the entire framework of international law becomes significantly weaker. Why should smaller countries respect rules that major powers openly ignore when dealing with each other? Third implication: the electoral and strategic calculation for every country deciding how to position itself between US and Chinese influence. Countries across Asia, Africa, and Latin America are watching what's happening between Russia and China and drawing conclusions about their own relationships with Beijing. According to YouGov polling conducted across 15 countries in January 2025, concerns about Chinese economic coercion increased by an average of 18 percentage points after news emerged of Xi's demands regarding the Moscow meeting. A Thai government official who spoke with CNN on Background stated that, "We're seeing what happens when you become too dependent on Chinese economic support. Russia's experience is making us rethink our entire approach to Belt and Road projects." The next few weeks are crucial. Putin needs to respond to Xi's demand before China's patience runs out. According to sources familiar with Chinese diplomatic communications reported by Bloomberg on January 27th, Beijing has set an informal deadline of early February for Putin to confirm his attendance at the Kremlin meeting under Xi's conditions. The Kremlin has been stalling, requesting multiple schedule changes and proposing alternative meeting formats, but Xi's team has reportedly rejected every attempt to modify the arrangements. We're watching a fundamental test of whether international relations will continue to operate under the post-World War II framework of sovereign equality or transition to an openly hierarchical system where economic power translates directly into political subordination. Russia, a country that fought 2 world wars to prevent exactly this kind of domination, now finds itself on the receiving end of the same imperial pressure it once resisted from Germany and worried about from the United States. The stakes have never been higher. Not just for Putin, who faces potential political humiliation or economic catastrophe. Not just for Russia, which must choose between independence and stability. But for every country trying to navigate relationships with major powers while preserving their own sovereignty and dignity. Xi Jinping has drawn a line. Vladimir Putin is running out of room to maneuver, and the rest of the world is watching to see whether a nuclear superpower will publicly acknowledge its subordination to Beijing's vision of global order. The answer to that question will shape international relations for decades to come.